Greetings and welcome to a special weird episode of Genre Grinder. With me is returning guest Betsy Jorgensen. Say hello, Betsy.
Hello, Betsy.
Hello, Betsy. Betsy, where do the people, if they haven't listened to one of the many podcasts you've done with me already, tell them where they can find you and what you're known for.
Well, I'm known for doing the podcast Your Favorite Monsters, and you can find that at yourfavoritemonsters.com.
And so Your Favorite Monsters is a Scooby-Doo thing. Did you guys finish all of...
We did finish all of specifically one season of Scooby-Doo, or one permutation of Scooby-Doo.
Series. Well,
yeah. Mystery Incorporated, which was 2 seasons. It's a very particular Scooby-Doo that has a lot of monster references, movie references, and has a overarching meta plot. We had a second season of our podcast in which we watched the show Clone High because we wanted to, and so we did. And we did very much intend to do a third season of our podcast, and then the pandemic happened.
Right.
And so it is still a possibility, a very real possibility, but A, we haven't decided what weird retro cartoon or show we want to do, and B, both of us are very tired. So
all the time.
Because I work in cybersecurity and my partner in podcasting works in IT in schools.
Yeah.
And spoiler alert, the pandemic makes both of us extremely exhausted.
Well, the good news is they're going to be making more Clone High, so that might give that a boost.
Yes, we will probably come back and do the new season of Clone High, at least as an addendum to season 2.
Mm-hmm. So this is as often I prepare for episodes of Genre Grinder way in advance, and I try to figure out who's the best person to do this thing. And basically, the last 2 episodes I did with Bill Ackerman were so intensive as far as getting ready to do them that I just kind of wanted to just sort of contacted Betsy and said, let's do one. And I would say over a back and forth of a couple days, we kind of went from, I said, hey, should we do Edgar Allan Poe episode as a follow-up to the Lovecraft episode we did? And you came back with, yeah, that's cool, but maybe Stephen King. And I came back with, but I'm like the only person alive who doesn't really like Stephen King.
And I was like, I don't really love Stephen King, but we could do something weird with it.
Yeah, and then I was like, well, there's already this thing called the King Cast, and funnily enough, apparently I just found out that Stephen King himself is going to be on King Cast soon. So by the time this goes live, like Stephen King will happen to be a very popular thing in the horror podcast community, but we can't compete with King Cast.
No, absolutely not.
They got celebrities. And yeah, it's an entire podcast devoted to Stephen King, and it's probably not the only one, but we're like, yeah, what else can we do? And so it's like, we could do some weird stuff. And so I was convinced that there had been dozens of foreign ripoffs of Stephen King movies, and then I could only find 2. But then Betsy pointed out, well, there's also all these short film adaptations, which is something known as the Stephen King Dollar Babies, which
yeah.
Well, it's basically, we'll get more to it in a second here, but it's a program he set up to sell the rights to independent filmmakers to make his movies for $1, movies based on his stuff for $1. And then I remembered that there had been a musical version of Carrie that flopped that was a big deal. So all said, we came up with 4 weird Stephen King adaptations.
Yeah.
Things that, we're not going to be talking about the super popular ones, the good ones like The Shining and Carrie, or even the really shitty ones like Sleepwalkers and all those horrible 90s TV ones that people somehow pretend are not as horrible as they were, but they were really bad.
No, they were bad.
And the other thing
They
that's
were
good
bad
about
in
it,
like I mean, bad in like the you get that out of the freezer section at a terrible grocery store kind of way, but you're not going to pretend that that is gourmet food. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, I mean, Mick Garris seems like the coolest, nicest man on the planet, but man, he made some terrible Stephen King movies for TV. but so, and the other thing about this is that since we're be going from short stories, someone like me could actually read these stories very quickly. I didn't have to read a whole book. I had already read Carrie. I'm aware of the book Carrie, so that one I was cool on. But most of these are based on stories that I could read in 15 minutes. Even at my second grade reading level, I could get through it.
And if I'm going to be honest, I think Stephen King is best read as a short story.
Yeah.
So I've read a lot of Stephen King.
That's something we're going to come across here, I think, is how much better he works in shorts.
Yep.
So, okay, we'll get started. The first one we're looking at is The Disciples of the Crow from 1983, which was the first adaptation of Children of the Corn. And I had totally forgotten. One of my Facebook friends, Sean Lialos, I believe that's how you pronounce his name. I never had to actually say it. He actually wrote a book on the Stephen King Dollar Babies, and I'll put a link to that. But the Cliff Notes version of his description of the program is that the same year Brian De Palma's Carrie was released, 1976, Stephen King, who was being very generous because he was not a hit maker yet, developed a program that would allow young filmmakers to produce short films based on his short stories, never novels, that had not already been optioned for film or TV. And the filmmakers were charged $1 to get the rights to do this. And the famous one, I believe, is future Shawshank Redemption, Green Mile, and The Mist director Frank Darabont. He made The Woman in the Room, which was pretty well received, and then he ended up with a good relationship with King and made all those adaptations of differing value. But
yeah,
the interesting thing about a lot of these, because now they're all over YouTube because they're all shot digitally. But for a while, they were only shown either as part of the director's reel or in film festivals. So a lot of them have been totally lost since they've been going on since the 70s. But some of them were collected on rentable VHS tapes, which were called Stephen King's Night Shift Collection, which were all adaptations from the 1978 book Night Shift, which was a bunch of shorts. And the ones that were ended up on VHS, those were pretty much the only of the older Dollar Babies that I know of that I could figure out survived, because there was at least a VHS source. And Disciples of the Crow was actually included on Arrow Video's Children of the Corn Blu-ray, so that one had a pretty decent transfer that you can get if you buy that Blu-ray. But for the most part, you just have to kind of go with VHS quality.
Yeah.
And then just to wrap this up, I looked on the website, Stephen King's official website, and there's still 23 stories you can apply through the website to make an adaptation. So it's still ongoing, and then stuff gets removed because some studio buys it up. And Stephen King is particularly hot right now. I don't know exactly when that happened. I feel like Netflix was really responsible for a lot of it. So
yeah, Netflix has bought a lot of Stephen King stuff recently. Like a lot of it's been coming out on Netflix. I also think that like Stephen King's, let me say, public presence on Twitter and his real spicy public personality has kept him in the public eye enough that his writing it reminds people that like his writing is good, and makes people want to like see his work, which sometimes it like Twitter is kind of a double-edged sword, I think, for a lot of writers. Sometimes it's very good for like adaptations of your work. Reminds people, especially if you have an extensive back catalog, that oh, maybe we do want to see more of this person's stuff. Maybe like them having fun arguments with politicians is a cool thing. But like, if they get in too much political hot water, then nobody wants to see their movies. So,
Or they tweet anti-trans screed and fuck
well,
everything up, but
but then sometimes they become like a champion of the entire UK. So,
hmm yeah, actually, just before, just when this Ukraine thing started, which is what's happening right now as we're recording this, is Russia has been in the Ukraine for a couple of days now. King was on Twitter doing Ukrainian stuff, so he was just the other day trending on Twitter, actually. Um,
yeah.
and I think that another thing that happened is that Gen X and older millennials started making a lot of nostalgia driven stuff that then younger people like. So something like Stranger Things is sort of built on the nostalgia of Stephen King uh, style storytelling. And then the uh, adaptation, the 2-part adaptation that came out and made a whole bunch of money. I think it's just his style of the things he did for It and Stand By Me, those kind of kids getting together, having an adventure, um, that kind of thing has really struck a chord with people who, I guess it's the same thing as 50s nostalgia in the 80s when we hadn't lived through the 50s, but in the 80s, I remember there having a sort of nostalgia for things in the 50s that I had never
Yeah.
experienced. I think kids and teens and young adults, they're having that sort of feeling for the 80s now. And I think King speaks to, it's a mix of Stephen King and Steven Spielberg, basically. The two Steves are kind of driving it. This is a theory I came up with months ago and not just right now on the spur of the moment.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I think also we have such a conservative group of entertainment makers.
mhm,
When you have something like Stranger Things that does so well, you then have a group of exceedingly conservative entertainment machines who want to like remake it,
mhm,
remake all this stuff. And then they look at everything they have in their back catalog and they're
mhm,
like, okay, what do we want to do? Well, if we can't remake something that was popular before, maybe we can see something else that that person has in their back catalog and we can do it again.
mhm.
Now, what was there that maybe didn't do as well before, but we could redo it?
And
Thank goodness we don't have like a Shining remake
yeah,
on.
well, yeah, we ended up with a pretty good sequel, but in
Yeah.
probably only because Stephen King had written that sequel. I'm pretty sure that if there wasn't a Doctor Sleep book, that we would have gotten a Shining remake.
Yeah.
Technically,
Yeah.
we do have a Shining remake. It was a made-for-TV movie and it was terrible. But we're just ignoring it for now.
Oh,
Um,
I did. Oh, that miniseries. Oh, yeah.
the one that King was supposed to be King's version, that because he hated The Shining and all the changes that were made.
Yeah, and he was wrong.
Hmm The um, earliest one of these Dollar Babies I could possibly find was Jeff Shiro's 82 adaptation of The Boogeyman, but Disciples of the Crow came out like months later. They were both very close together as far as I could tell.
I
Uh,
mean, and Children of the Corn is the weirdest, stupid story.
yeah. Well, and
It
that's
is a.
something you come across is that I think that the Children of the Corn, it's very strange because Children of the Corn was a minor hit. It's not a very good movie. It's kind of a movie with some good photography and a good cast that just wastes all its potential on every. It's just boring, but
Yeah.
it has 9 sequels, 1 prequel, and a 2009 made-for-TV remake. And it was directed by Fritz Kirsch. I just think it's a boring movie. And so when I found out someone else had tried it, based on the actual short story, I was really interested in the idea of that.
Children of the Corn is basically like a campfire ghost story
Hmm
that is barely more than that. And in the actual short story, hinges on a monster that never makes it into the movie.
Yeah, as far as I know, I mean,
And
I haven't seen the millions of sequels, but I don't think it's in any of them. I think.
I think He That Walks Behind the Rose makes it into like makes it into the sequels. I don't remember. I've but like the whole um there being a terrible dark god that these kids are actually worshiping is kind of what makes the short story interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fact that the kids go crazy and kill all their parents and like that's a thing that's going on
Mm-hmm.
is what fascinates everybody about that story. I think it's what everybody because this trope in this genre, like this idea, shows up frickin' everywhere.
Yeah.
It shows up in other movies. It shows up in Fallout. It shows up like everybody has cribbed this since this like happened.
Yeah, and I don't know the evil child. I'm actually a really big fan, and someday we'll do an episode on evil child movies.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know where it starts, and it's probably ancient. But
I mean, you've got the like Esau and the Bible
yeah,
where
there is
you
always
have
those stories in the Bible.
yeah, well, you've got the Jacob and Esau where I'm not my brother's keeper
Hmm.
because Cain kills Abel and like where did my brother go? But also the dad is like I'm not going to give the shepherd brother something. I'm going to give the I'm sorry, I'm not going to give the
You can
uh
really make it up. I won't remember, but
it's fair. It's it's really the whole I killed my brother because he was going to get something I wanted, and
yeah,
they're kids, and it's the Cain instinct where I'm gonna kill my brother kind of thing. And then, but it's the kid killing the other kid, and then everyone's like, oh god, this happened, and the
there.
kid's got blood on his hand, and then he's cast out. But like, how much that's a little kid and how much that's a grown ass adult doing that is like a toss up. But like most people think of that as like a child murdering a child,
Yeah.
and
Well, then
way
there's
too young.
there's like the Lord of the Flies thing where you have the idea of a group of children.
Hmm.
In that they don't attack adults, but the idea that a group of children can go feral, and that idea being then spread to the idea that a group of feral children, like I could probably punch out five-year olds, but once you're up to 25-year olds, they're probably going to get me kind of
Yeah,
fear. Um,
and and I do feel like I need to say with the Lord of the Flies, there's the whole like there was a world war at the time, they were
yeah,
fine for a long time, and then paranoia set in because they were on an abandoned island for months and all of this, but like everybody shorthands it to like they were evil British children and were just
yeah.
given one one bad day. They all just went absolutely batshit. That isn't what happens in the book, but it's funnier that way.
Well, yeah, I
Um,
guess it's like saying that Animal Farm is a story about mean pigs.
yeah, but
Yeah,
it was also written as like a satire of terrible British boys
yes,
because the guy who wrote it was like, I teach British boys, they're monsters.
yeah. I mean, I worked at daycare for years, and there are times when you're pretty sure, like, they're going to figure out that you can't stop them.
Yeah,
Like, especially if
you
you're in a school situation, I'm not allowed to just go around fighting them. I have to stop them on their term, on certain terms, and they might figure out that I can't at any
that
minute.
that sometimes a union will overcome a
Hmm.
single point of authority.
Yep. So that is sort of what I guess everybody takes from Children of the Corn. They sort of this version, which I should say was written and directed by John Woodward. He only
Mhm.
made two other movies. One, Good Girl, Bad Girl, which appears to be a '90s trashy sex comedy, and a different trashy sex comedy from 2000 called Vice that was retitled The Texas Taliban after that thing happened.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Love it.
But anyway, so the idea here, yeah, he really sticks to the children have gone crazy, and it seems to be implied in this one, and it might have just been because I just watched the Netflix series Midnight Mass, which is very Stephen King-esque. The idea that standardized Christian religion can turn people crazy too. It really does seem that he implicated that these kids are just being driven mad by some sort of religious fervor and not a unseen evil entity.
Yeah. But He That Walks Behind the Rose is just such a good monster.
Yeah, I don't.
And
The kids barely talk in this adaptation, actually.
yeah. Also, I love the short story because like the whole thing is they find like the religious roster, and the person like sees like the weird horror story within the horror story of like the kids have been marrying each other
Mm-hmm.
because they're like the kids think that the world has ended and they have to repopulate, and like it is a little slice of horror within a horror story
Mm-hmm.
that you're like, wow, this Stephen King guy knows how to craft a tiny world, and he should stick to a tiny world. He
um.
should not be given enough rope to hang himself with.
Yeah,
And that's the problem with the novel.
and that's also the problem I think with the other adaptation, The Children of the Corn, that this does right. So that this is, I would say, more than half the plot of The Children of the Corn, and then within 20 minutes, whereas that movie just kind of keeps stretching. And I guess the difference being that in this version, the bickering couple escapes the feral murder children
Yeah.
and just leaves town, whereas in the longer
Which,
movie they get crucified and
yeah.
becomes more of a Wicker Man situation.
Yeah, no. I mean, that is fine. Like, they could die at the end, but
Hmm.
like, I was a little surprised that they lived.
Yeah, and it also just sort of it's like they have this sort of bleak, like, wow, that was horrible, but there's no sort of like larger implication that something bad's gonna happen.
Yeah,
um
no.
there's
Also, like, driving through Nebraska, which is kind of where this is supposed to take place. If
mhm.
you've ever driven through Nebraska, through the cornfields, you get it.
Yeah, our car broke in Nebraska once, actually, not too long ago. We got
It's
stuck there.
terrible.
Yeah,
There's corn forever.
yeah, yeah, into Iowa too. And that's the thing, is that the long movie does well is gets that scary cornfield vibe that this movie doesn't really go into that part, which I guess it didn't call itself Children of the Corn, so um
Yeah. I
doesn't
mean, I
need to
liked
have
the
the corn.
crows.
Yeah, the crow stuff was cool. It's a stylish movie. It's a movie that takes the fact that it has no budget and amateur actors, though the two leads, Elise Lester and Gabriel Folsey, had respectable careers after this, mostly day players and supporting characters.
Yeah, they didn't do bad.
No, they're not bad, but they're not very well directed,
Yeah.
you take a big chance revolving a lot of your movie around children when you can't afford professional acting children. But
Yeah.
I overcome a lot of it just looking nice. It just looks nice and creepy, and
Yeah. I mean, it's not terrible.
no, and it knows what it is, and it
Yeah.
keeps it low. One, I think my biggest complaint is that there's a part where a kid comes out of uh, I guess it's a small church, donning a cross, and he pushes a button and a stiletto blade comes out of the cross, and it happens so quickly that you can't enjoy how cool that is.
Yeah.
There's no like swing or slow mo or anything like that. It's just sort of like, oh, there was a knife in there. Oh,
It
cool.
also didn't make any sense.
No, it didn't. But somebody made that prop, and low budget filmmaking. You're like, God, you got to respect the props.
Like,
Some poor person
I
put so
know.
much effort into that.
I was like, you put that nonsensical thing in the script. You need to own it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
But
always
anyway.
stuff like that in low budget. Well, another interesting thing here is that this was shot on film, um, you don't have movies like this anymore because there was no real market for shorts. There was a market for anthologies, collections, but there was no market for short horror films. And now there is YouTube, and you can shoot your own thing and just stick it up on YouTube or Vimeo. So it's interesting from that standpoint. And then also looking at other really cheap garbage from the early 80s, like I did when we did the shot on VHS stuff. All that stuff ends up being unwatchable simply because you couldn't rent a videotape that was less than an hour long. It had to be, quote, feature length to really sell it. So you end up with all these movies that should have been only 20 some minutes long, like this one, and would have been perfectly fine little indie horror story, but they get dragged out into 90 minutes because they want to be able to rent them.
Yeah.
It's sort of an interesting thing that I hadn't really, kind of going backwards with cheap stuff the way I've been doing lately on the podcast, just realizing that that is part of the problem, is that you couldn't sell it as VHS tape as just a short film.
I mean, I think that's really Anthology's place.
Yeah.
Like,
and anthology still, in fact, there is one of my favorite anthology horror movies is called From a Whisper to a Scream from 1987. It was one of Vincent Price's last movies, and he hated it, but directed by Jeff Burr. And one of its things is called The Four Soldiers, and it's set at the end of the Civil War, and some Union soldiers come into a Confederate town where all of the adults have been killed in the war and children have taken it over. And they pray to basically a god they've made that out of body parts. It's just this big, gross body part god that was very clearly inspired by the well, what is it now? I can't remember. Is the short story called Disciples of the Crow or Children of the Corn?
I don't remember.
Anyway, it was clearly inspired by that, but it works so well in this very short form with a specific time frame in mind, and a specific reason as to why the adults have disappeared. So yeah, this kind of thing can work really well. It also reminded me of one of my favorite movies ever, which is a Spanish movie called Who Can Kill a Child.
Yeah.
Definitely not inspired by it came out before this. I don't think Stephen King had written the story yet. It's more like the Birds. Huh?
Who Can Kill a Child is a little bit more like A Bad Seed, right?
Well, it's almost more like The Birds or Night of the Living Dead, where they go to these people go vacation on this island, and the children have some unforeseen ailment that has made them go crazy and kill all the adults. And so the plot, it's not plot heavy, but this couple has to weigh the idea that that they have to kill children to survive, and that these children are very ill with something that's making them act crazy, but they're still children. And then children in large numbers can totally overpower you and also catch you off guard and kill you. And this short version, not the Children of the Corn, but Disciples of the Crow, had a little bit of that in the scenes where all the kids just start coming out of everywhere and attacking them with baseball bats. They're not even really kids anymore at that point, I guess, is part of the problem with Disciples of the Crow, is that it takes place years later, so they're really all more or less adults, but there's still some kids. Anyway, it's kind of a neat one of those things that's more neat as an idea than an execution, which is kind of going to be the theme here, this whole podcast, I think.
I mean, yeah, that's fair.
I mean, we could have done this whole thing on just Dollar Babies because there's so many of them, and I'm sure some of them are really worthwhile. Just because there are so many good short horror movies these days. But so I don't know. Do you have anything else on Disposal of the Crow you want to talk about, or?
No. I will say that, like, I do think that I think I was gonna say something about The Bad Seed.
Oh yeah, I mean, The Bad Seed is a really classic early, at least hit wise, for Evil Child. There's again, I want to cover this sometime for the podcast, but there's the idea that the earlier Evil Child movies are like they take off from The Bad Seed, where there's one evil kid. and
Yeah.
then later it becomes a group of evil kids or sick
Yeah.
kids or
And
zombie kids.
almost like it's a disease that spreads, I
Right.
think was what I was going to say. But no, I lost it and it's gone forever.
Okay, so we'll move on. So like I said, we were going to talk about Carrie the musical,
Oh, Carrie, the
which
musical.
so the backstory on this, if you didn't know, Stephen King's debut novel in 1974 was Carrie, and it's about a girl who is um, being raised by her crazy fundamentalist mother, who is bullied at school and who develops telekinetic powers and takes revenge on everybody. It's probably my personal favorite Stephen King book as far as novel, and I think it's my favorite Stephen King movie, and maybe even my favorite Stephen King Brian De Palma, or my favorite Brian De Palma movie. But the thing about the book that's interesting is it's written in a way that would really work for found footage horror, because it's, or not even found footage, but like mockumentary horror,
Yeah,
because
it really would.
it's pieced together, um like from news events and interviews and stuff. um and then it was made as a TV movie in 2002, and then the De Palma movie was remade by Kimberly Pierce in 2013, and there was a 1999 sequel called The Rage Carrie 2, and none of these did anything with the cool format. I was very sad to say, especially the 2013 remake. I really thought, because found footage was so popular, they would go for a kind of mockumentary approach, but I guess they really just wanted to remake the movie, not the book. But at some point in the late 80s, they decided to make a musical out of it.
Yeah, yeah, they did. Speaking of stories about terrible kids, um, we got Carrie. But that's
That's
not really
true.
fair to Carrie.
No, Carrie, it's not Carrie's fault.
No, it really isn't. I always think of Carrie as an epistolary novel, but it's not really that because it is more told through newspaper clippings rather than letters.
Hmm. It's interesting that King did that and then basically never. I mean, he does do letter stuff, and actually, we'll get to that later. He takes that from Lovecraft for sure, but
Yeah, he was definitely like stretching his idea of like how he was going to write a novel with this one, which is wild.
that it
Um
was his first. I think
yeah.
that's the crazy part. I mean, I didn't think I found out it was his first until well after I had read it. I just assumed it was after he had been popular for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. Yes, absolutely. I did not realize for I had forgotten and then was reminded when doing like the research on this that it was
Hmm.
his first. And oh man, in some ways you can tell because it's very formulaic for his works later, where you look at it as okay, something happens, it escalates, it kind of backs off a little bit, and then more terrible things happen.
And it's a
But
story
then it
that,
but then it kind of dies off and like it never really goes up again.
yeah,
Like
the De Palma movie gives it a proper climax by telling it the way it tells it.
yes. In the book itself, it really like it just really ends
Yeah.
and you are left feeling like it was really a tragedy. Like this terrible thing happened and nobody can really explain why, and it really was a tragedy. Like this thing happened to Carrie. She was raised and abused by a bunch of people, including her mother. And then this terrible psychic event happened, and she accidentally killed a bunch of people at her school and then died. But then we have the musical.
Well, the thing is the story itself. It makes sense why this particular story is something people want to keep retelling, and I think is something that gets its way into other stories that aren't Carrie adaptations.
Yeah.
King definitely struck upon something. I'm
Yes.
sure there are other stories that have similar ideas behind them, but um, this is the one that was popular and it came out at the right time. And because it's all about, he's it's for how not well he writes women in future books. He does have a sensitivity to Carrie as a character and what a young girl would have to, like, what it would be like. I'm assuming he went from the standpoint of a man not understanding what a period's like, and that other cis men like him and me can probably think of that as, wow, that must be terrifying. I wonder if there's a story there.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if like there is some of that where I wonder if I having to explain that to my theoretical daughter what I would do in that situation.
Hmm.
God, that. And I remember him like reading an article about that or something and then extrapolating.
Yeah.
And that was where he said he got the idea for Carrie. Oh, and seeing the shower with the pink curtain in a shower room where there would be a shower with a pink curtain where people who are having their period could go.
Okay. Yeah.
And he was like, well, what if that curtain wasn't there? What if, what if, what if, what if?
Right. And
And
so I think it's because he was sort of sensitive to the idea behind the story
yeah,
that that it ends up, it works. It works because you, in the book and in the original movie, you really do care about Carrie as a character, which
yes,
horror. It's hard to even call it a horror story. It's really a tragedy.
it
Um,
is. It absolutely is a tragedy. Like, I think this and I don't know. Have you read Firestarter?
no, I've seen the movie, but I never did read Firestarter.
Okay, I think seeing the movie is fine for this one.
Oh,
Firestarter is also a tragedy.
yeah, about another telekinetic girl.
Yeah.
Hmm.
My my mom has only ever tried to read one Stephen King story, and it's Firestarter, and she started it and stopped it because in her opinion, she read the first two chapters and couldn't see any good way out for that poor little girl.
Hmm.
And I'm like, fair. And like she works in protective services for children.
Hmm.
So I'm like, you know what? Fair, mom. That seems perfectly reasonable. You shouldn't have to imagine psychic powers for children to get
Yeah,
a child out of that situation.
yeah.
That isn't your jam.
It's funny you say that because my mother has been in early childcare since she was like in her, like 18, um, and she stopped reading Stephen King. Can you guess which book made her stop reading Stephen King?
The Shining?
Cujo,
Oh, yeah.
because in the book the kid gets killed, um,
Yeah.
and that was
Yeah.
just too much. So King definitely has no qualms about killing children and putting children through hell.
So
And
I would have thought The Shining because the dad breaks the kid's arm.
yes, and so I think I
Child
don't know why The
endangerment
Shining
is
wasn't.
a thing.
Yeah.
I was about to say a little bit earlier about when we were talking about how Stephen King is having a resurgence, and part of the reason it might be is because his son is also like
Hmm.
doing very well. I gotta wonder if Mr. Hill looks at all of the kids getting the crap beaten out of them in Stephen King, especially early Stephen King books, and being
Hmm.
like, man, my dad hated kids.
Hmm. I mean, he
And
probably kind of did. I don't know if
yeah,
there's any abuse in Stephen King's personal life. I don't know a lot about his childhood or any of that stuff, but
it is.
um,
I hate to try to like extrapolate on what an author writes because um seems shitty, but man, you have to you have to look at a lot of that with like how many drugs the author did
hmm.
and like how just some themes that keep popping up like how angry the dad is about kids all the time in most of his books and how badly things happen to small kids
Hmm.
and how much it
Or
tears
parents
the
just
father apart.
flat out aren't around in a lot of the stories. Like, yeah, absent
Yeah.
parents seem to. I mean, it could just be as simple as he was a latchkey kid in the
Yeah. I mean,
60s.
Again,
50s.
like, this is not a thing that we looked up, and there are plenty of Stephen King
No,
podcasts
yeah.
out there, so we are wildly speculating. So, however, it's one of those things that keeps popping up in his work, so
Like,
it's easy to do.
I was realizing that James Gunn movies and TV shows are all about people who hate their parents. And I'm just like, what the
Yeah.
fuck did James Gunn's parents do to him to make him this angry? At a certain point, you got to make assumptions about the author, I think.
There, again, it's, you look at the themes that keep popping up.
Yeah.
It is not what one individual person writes in one individual work. It is a theme, and you go, there might be something here.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen King also writes about killer cars because he was almost killed by a car. So,
Yeah. Anyway,
Carrie was turned into
Carrie was turned into this musical.
This popular book, movie, and idea that
Mhm.
could, in my eyes, work very well as a musical. It's
But
all
it
about
didn't.
teen angst. Musical interludes work perfectly for teen angst.
Oh God, but it didn't.
Well,
Oh God, but it did not.
So
I'm not bearing the lead on this one, Gabe.
yeah,
I know musicals. It was bad.
yeah, but the thing that's interesting in the backstory, and I should say, because this always happens, there is a 17 episode podcast devoted entirely to the making of Carrie the musical called Out for Blood, the story of Carrie the musical. So I just did cliff notes here. This is not, if you really want hours and hours and hours on this subject, it is available in podcast form. But the adaptation was developed by Lawrence D. Cohen, who wrote the De Palma movie. The music was composed by Michael Gore with lyrics from Dean Pitchford. Gore and Pitchford were both just off of Fame. And that title song in particular had become, because the movie was a hit and it became a TV series, but the song Fame was just a monster hit.
Yeah, no, like they have really good bona fides. Let me talk about my bona fides.
But wait, just let me get to the.
Okay.
So there, then it was choreographed by Debbie Allen, who I think is the most famous person here, who's known for her work on Fame, and she also was the producer on the Superior Cosby Show spinoff, A Different World, and she was an actress and producer of Amistad, director of a crime drama called Out of Sync. So I mean, she's like, I feel like Debbie Allen is the big star of this adaptation. So they put this together, and Fame is really it. Like, Fame, they were trying to do Carrie but Fame, and so it got onto Broadway. There was a bit of a kerfuffle with when they were like what do you call that when you're prepping something before you show it,
previews,
when they're workshopping it.
Workshopping, yeah.
They lost an actress, and so another interesting side story is that Margaret Wright White, Carrie's religious mother, ended up being played by Betty Buckley, who played the PE teacher, Miss Collins, in the De Palma movie. And this is interesting. I'm just getting the good stuff out of the way, basically. Right? So what's happening right now, Betsy?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I'm going to just have judgment.
Yeah. So I'm just getting. So this is an interesting idea, because Miss Collins is like in the story, especially the movie. Miss Collins is the mom Carrie deserves, and the person who actually cares about her. So it's interesting to have an actress play her and then the abusive mother in a different version of it. I think that's cool. But this, so this was one of the largest flops in Broadway history, and actually became like the go-to punchline. There's like a whole book called Not Since Carrie, I think it's called. And the only thing that cut it off from being an even bigger joke today is that Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark happened.
Which like literally crippled people.
Yeah. And the whole industry, like it costs so much money. Like Carrie cost a lot of money, but holy shit. I watched a thing about Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, and that shit it cost so much that they figured out that they would have had to have sellout showings for like 40 years to make their money back or something. But so Carrie lasted from May 12th to May 15th.
Yeah.
5
Yeah.
performances, 16 previews. Uh, it was horrible, and everybody hated it. And but then at some point in 2012, an off-Broadway revival started,
Yeah,
and
it
it
was
was
somebody with like a love of the heart of the show or whatever,
it,
and like spruced up part of it and took out some of the more um I want to say 80s elements.
right, the Fame. They took so there is no recordings of the original 88 version, but there are clips on YouTube that they had shot to send out to reviewers of the main cast performing songs. There's about 15 minutes worth of songs.
I
Uh,
feel like I we should also say that like that isn't super unusual that there wouldn't be a recording of the original because
it was
they don't
illegal.
record shows from Broadway
No.
almost ever. And like an archived version of a play is real rare.
Yeah.
But like they might do a production shot or two of like a set there like there should be production archives of the costumes, the
Hmm.
set, and the fact that there are short recordings of some of the dances and the sets in motion is wild to me at
Yeah.
all.
And that they're
And
not all bootlegs. Some of the footage is bootleg. Somebody on YouTube put together the longest version possible based on these recordings, the original cast recordings that were audio only, and he put pictures to them. It's kind of hard to watch, but that's probably as close as you can get to watching the original 88 show and getting any idea of what happened.
yeah, I mean, because also the bootleg, like to bootleg this, the recording equipment had to be the size of a 30-pound dog.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was camcorder too, which the quality is terrible.
Yeah.
Like when people bootleg shows these days, they take in, I mean, their camera works pretty good these days, but even 20 years ago, you could get a half decent digital camera in there and at least get like a 270 uh 270p version of it, but we're talking like if there's any light on stage, it just becomes this big white spot that you can't tell what the fuck's going on.
And
um
one of the sets was like all white light.
mhm.
Um,
it
because it was when when Gabe keeps saying fame, one of the like uh visual demarkers of that was basically a 80s aerobics gym.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and there was
And
Fame, and what was not Dirty Dancing. That one took place in the 80s. Uh
hair?
no, Hair had a bit of it. No, Christine, what's the dancing movie from the 80s with
Flashdance?
Flashdance? Yes, thank you.
Oh.
With what I was going to say with What a Feeling. Yeah, so there's this sort of workout knee-high sock thing like vibe. And so it works in the case of Fame because in Fame they're practicing it's about a school that's a performance school. Yeah, leg warmers. And I know they look like bobby socks, but yeah, they're called leg warmers. In Fame, it works because it's the context of being a performing arts school. So they're performing and they're practicing and they're wearing their workout clothes. But then that sort of picks up and becomes a cool thing. So we have instead of girls, like one of the few numbers from this I could find, instead of girls wearing what you would wear for PE, they're wearing basically their Fame get-ups and doing this whole line dance ridiculous workout gear thing that probably felt dated already in 1988. I don't know
Yeah,
how
yeah, it did.
how pop culture aware I was in 1988, but I think I would have looked at that and it would have felt like it was from 1982.
I mean, it was huge hair, like huge hair.
Hmm.
Um, fuchsia spandex,
Hmm.
huge leg warmers, and then a bright white set, and it looked like it should all be going on a Trapper Keeper.
Yeah, yeah. And
Like,
I mean, no disrespect to Debbie Allen, but it just is totally insane to attach this to a tragic little story like Carrie. It just it was it was nuts.
And okay, and that's the original production.
Yeah, which
I'm literally not even talking about that when I'm saying how terrible this show is, though.
right. And so the new show apparently moved around some songs. I looked up, none of the songs were credited to anybody other than Gore and Pitchford. So I guess any songs that were different were just taken from different versions or something. It was compacted to be off Broadway. It was the thing I think that they did cleverly is that they tried much harder to make it feel like it was taking place at an actual high school. Um,
Yeah.
and so they
Um,
compacted the scale too, and they made it so that high schools could do it, which I don't know what that's called when you have a thing where schools can
they
get the
just
right,
released the rights.
just the
So,
rights. Okay.
yeah, they just released the rights so that actual
And it
for
has to be
example,
shorter too, because like Broadway shows are several hours long, and like you can't really do it.
no, no.
Now, I don't
Um,
remember ever. I went to the arts high and junior high. And I don't remember us ever having a play that lasted longer than 2 hours. I swear that they would
I
squeeze them up.
look, I've been in many musicals.
Yeah. Okay.
You get the rights, and if you haven't been in a play that's been that long, it's because the people cut them.
Yeah.
Um, and it's usually because they're like, nobody wants to sit through a play that long.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the rights you can get. Um,
Oh, okay. Yeah, it makes sense. So it's like when you do a cover music, you get the rights to cover it, and there's separate rights to
cut it.
change it,
Yep.
cut it. Okay.
And like there are certain mechanical licenses that allow you to both change and to do it completely. For example, Hamilton, it does not have rights for high schools to do it. Certain musicals that are currently on Broadway have the rights pulled so that regional theaters and high school theaters can't do it.
Right.
Um, or if the musicals are touring currently,
Right.
usually the
Right.
rights are pulled. But if they're not, and you're not competing with big touring houses or big regional theaters or big like professional theaters, then like literally any community theater could do it. And that's what they did. And
And
so anybody can do this disaster.
yeah, and so now there was a couple. We actually ended up watching different versions because I found a better one after I'd already given you a link and you had watched the other one. So the one I watched just had better image quality. It wasn't necessarily better performance quality. I don't know. Um,
Yeah. I
but it was
can't
from
imagine. Look, it couldn't have improved it that much.
it was from the Miniaki Theater,
Mhm.
2019. It was college kids doing it, because at the end they come out and talk and talk about their senior graduating class and stuff.
Ah.
Um, for me, I think the thing I was trying to remain positive here. It's feels. I mean, I don't know how much of it was that these were amateurs doing it. I don't know if this could be made better by really good production values and professionals. But I mean, the people I watched doing it were great singers, so I think that's all that really you can do for it. And
I
and
mean, there is some things you could do with better direction
yeah,
and better actors,
yeah,
but I honestly don't think that it was the actors' fault for the material.
and and it's interesting because I think it is, if you take away the musical elements, if you put the fact that I think a musical could work again because angst is good for musicals. I think from a story adaptation standpoint, it's actually also a good adaptation. It makes some differences to Chris, who is the villain of the piece, um, and Miss Collins. There's one scene in particular that I thought was a good choice that is not in the movie or the book, where in the Miss Collins forces the girls to apologize to Carrie instead of forcing them into grueling PE detention. So in the movie, they'll have their prom privileges revoked. I should say, if people haven't seen Carrie for some reason, they she has her period in PE while showering and is bullied by the girls for it because she doesn't know what a period is because her mother has kept it from her as a fundamentalist.
Yeah.
And so
That's pretty important for like
yeah,
all of the conversations we're about to have. So
yeah. So she didn't know, and her mom thinks it makes her a sinner, and the other girls think it makes her ridiculous that she could possibly not know this and be so scared because she thought she was dying. And so in the movie, they will have their prom privileges revoked if they don't go through this detention with Miss Collins, who's doing a pretty good job of making sure things work. And then in the book, they will also be suspended. And then in the book, there's a whole thing about how Chris's dad is a lawyer and tries to get her out of it, and it doesn't work, and so she gets even more pissed off. But so here in this case, Miss Collins miscalculates by forcing the girls to apologize, which is then just putting Carrie in an even worse situation. And Carrie is actually telling them they don't have to apologize, and it also gives Chris a chance to let it go, and she digs in more. So I like the idea that Miss Collins isn't like the perfect angel, because I've always been kind of pissed off that she kills Miss Collins. And in this case, Miss Collins has fucked up. And I do think that one change is an interesting change. And I do wonder, I never did see the 2013-2014 movie. I do wonder if that happens there.
yeah.
But I like that. And I like that
Yeah.
they gave Carrie a little bit more agency in this version. She is less gentle about attacking her mom with her powers than she is in the movie.
Yeah. I do like some of the changes they do with Carrie, but I also hate it. Like, okay, I like the changes they make with Carrie, but having a lot of Carrie's like inner monologues be
Sung.
songs
Mm-hmm.
make I understand it's a musical and I need to get over it, but
Well, they even put the songs in good places, I think. I think
yeah,
structurally it works really well too.
I
But there's
think
no bangers.
there's
There's
no bangers.
the
There's
closest
literally no
the
bangers.
closest to a banger is I like the song And Eva's Weak, which Carrie and her mom sing at the beginning.
Yeah,
I liked that one.
that one was okay. That one was good. That
And
one
I
I
liked
will say that one.
there was rock opera guitar solos during the climax. That was pretty cool. But I just
Yeah,
like guitar solos.
that's
uh,
fair.
but yeah, none of the other songs I can't even remember, honestly. Like I watched this less than a week ago, and I just don't remember the
Oh, I don't
songs.
remember any of the songs, and that's bad. I get songs in my head like all the time.
And it's a little. There's certain things that they chose not to do. There's at no point do they do and They're All Gonna Laugh at You or Dirty Pillows reference in any of Margaret White's songs. It's like those are like the
They
two most.
neutered so much of the mother.
Yeah,
Like okay. So, they put so much of the villainy of the entire piece in the high school
yeah,
of on Chris, of on Chris the girl, and while yes, she is the villain of the piece. I
yeah.
get this.
Yeah, I mean there are two villains. It really is Chris
It
and
is a dual villain piece.
yeah.
And yeah, but like they do this weird tragedy of Carrie's mom where like the world really is sinful and I'm doing this for to be the best for Carrie. No!
Yeah.
No, that is the most terrible message I've ever heard of a musical. I'm doing this. I'm abusing my daughter
Yeah.
for the best?
Yeah. And I
God.
mean there's
God,
no
that is
question.
terrible.
There's no question in the source or the movie that she I mean the book goes into something about like she I guess was raped and carries the product of rape maybe, but it's also so much of
We,
Margaret's
like,
stuff is unreliable.
there
She's her
has
own
to be.
very unreliable narrator.
Yes, there is an unreliable narrator, and the idea that Carrie is. Even if Carrie has made mistakes and Carrie isn't a perfect angel,
Mm-hmm.
like, that Carrie, like, goes too far and murders a bunch of people, or misinterprets like advances from people and like should have picked up some things in school, or you don't want to make Carrie a victim in all ways. Those are choices you can make in the
Mm-hmm.
play and like make her character a little bit more complex. The one place where she is 100% the victim is her house.
Yeah, for sure.
And the whole like trying to make the mom less of that, I was just baffled the entire time.
I think there's room to make it a little bit more subtle than the movie, where you can start with maybe Carrie is being protected by her mom, and then you, as the piece goes on, you realize, oh no, this is
Yeah, I
really
just
bad abuse. But that's not really what they're going for in this.
no, it was I was not
Maybe they just
having
wanted
it.
to make it so that anybody off Broadway would want to play um, Margaret White. But
Literally everybody off Broadway wants to play a scene chewing villain.
yeah, I mean,
Everybody should want this. Anyway,
well, what's her name actually won, or she was nominated for the Oscar. She did not win. Both
yeah,
both
Oscar.
Sissy Spacek and Piper
Yeah,
Laurie were
why
nominated.
Tony? No, it was a terrible show. What am I talking about?
But yeah, I mean,
Sorry, we
yeah,
were still
everybody wants
talking
to be
about the
Piper
show.
Laurie and Carrie.
I just really didn't like what they did with uh the basically most of the high school characters,
Mm-hmm.
most of the high school kid characters, and especially Chris.
Yeah.
Like most of her, they tried to like complex her up too, and I'm like, I get what you're doing here.
Well, I think seeing my favorite part is, like I said, that them giving her a chance to get out and her being such a shit that she
Mhm.
doesn't take it, and like I like that part.
Oh, no, not that. Like the whole she used to be my best friend
Oh
in
yeah,
all
yeah,
of
yeah,
these
yeah, yeah.
things, and now I don't even know who she is. And then just making her so cartoonishly evil, even to um the goody
Sue
gumdrops.
Snell, yeah.
Sue, yeah.
That
This
is
is
another
terrible
structural
writing.
thing that I think was a
It's
good
just
idea, is that the play, the musical is told. Sue Snell is the central narrator basically.
mhm.
And it's the only version I've ever seen that actually uses part of the book structure, because it's being told through interviews with her, um, which I thought was really funny, that of all the adaptations, the book is the one that used that. Um, and Sue Snell is a bit of a narrator in the book too. Um,
Yeah, she
it's,
is. And I
it's
do think that works.
yeah,
Um, but where it doesn't work, it really just messes with the characters.
and I wonder if maybe the longer original version of that we weren't able to see, if it helped her character. I don't imagine it helped Chris as a character, but I wonder if it helped Sue Snell, because she is almost the lead. She's at like a co-lead with Carrie, sort of.
And and that part I thought worked, but I also was like, "Oh my god.
Yeah, like I
This
said,
whole
it's a good structural adaptation, I think. But um,
yeah, except oh my god."
yeah,
I will also say that I am an incredibly harsh judge of musicals, and I own that. I
yeah,
um as I was going to say early, I have worked in professional theater for many years. I have worked in many musicals. I have worked off Broadway. I have worked with Broadway actors. And while the performances the people were giving were perfectly fine, I'm not judging their acumen.
hmm
And maybe I am a little. And it's hard for me to be like completely removed of that, to be like, I just don't like the structure. Maybe it's actually the performance. Maybe I'm being a
no,
total bitch here.
it's
But a lot of it is when you remove like the humanity of the character to make it like a 1-2 beat, and
mhm,
then you have these characters who even in their source material like were more black and white, and then you try to gray them up
mhm.
to try to give false complexity, and what you instead do is make a victim complacent in their own death. It's bullshit is what I'm saying.
And well, and another thing that aren't going to go into, because again, there's a podcast about this, but a lot of the original production's problems were trying to figure out how to end it with, because in the movie it's a bunch of special effects events, because Carrie's using telekinesis to burn down the school. And apparently, even dumping the bucket of blood, which is like the most famous image from the movie, they couldn't figure out how to do it correctly. And at one point, the actress playing Carrie was almost decapitated by the bucket falling so fast. So there are a share of Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark backstories there too. But the thing that I think they ended up figuring out is when they have to make the scale so much smaller that it can work at a high school, a literal high school performance of this, is that they try to turn the moment when she's killing everybody into a choreograph, like a dance, which is a really good idea. Version I saw wasn't a great dance, but I could see there being like a cool kind of puppeting thing that they could do with that. I think, and so I think that a lot of your disappointment and my own, which mine was, is hampered by the fact that I expected it to kind of suck, and so the fact that I liked any of it surprised me.
I mean, I was expecting it to suck because I've heard about Carrie. Like, who
Yeah,
hasn't? And I've done a play where we've dropped a bucket of blood on someone. It's terrible.
yeah,
I've had to clean a literal white outfit every night after we've dropped blood on it.
yeah.
It is a nightmare. We did a version of the Iliad where we basically did the "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" outfit, and we covered it with blood every night, and it
Hmm.
had to be white the next day. That's
Yeah, and
what professional theater is, baby.
yeah, and that's where the big, Broadway versions get away with it because they can just buy 40 of the same costume.
Yeah. And we were a professional theater, but we could not afford that much
Yeah,
outfit, baby.
yeah,
And yeah, that's what it is. Like, even with that, like, they you have to do 8 shows a week,
yeah.
and there has to be a 2 performance day, and so you have to get the blood off the stage because it's a safety issue. So, like, these are all things you have to think about, and I get it. Like, when they were like, we couldn't do the blood, I was like, I understand. I understand what you were working with here.
Well,
But
so I think this could still work, but it would need to be redone. But the idea is still sound, and maybe even would have to be a movie instead of a stage show, so you could have special effects and stuff. But like a rock musical based on Carrie, I could see working. It's just so
I
hard to do it as a stage show.
I mean, I could see a stage show happening potentially.
Perhaps if the Evan Hansen movie had been a hit in some weird alternate dimension where they get a different actor to play the role, then you
Still,
can talk
no,
about
absolutely
turning
not.
Carrie into a
Sorry.
movie, musical. Well, like I said, I think it would work really much better if it was knowingly campy. I think that
Yeah,
you
I
kind of
mean,
have to be aware of its silliness. In a
Rent did fine,
Yeah,
but people like Rent
yeah,
despite its
for
flaws.
some reason.
I know.
But yeah, so Carrie the musical, no, not good. Um, Unfortunately, slightly better than its reputation would tell you it is. I was kind of hoping for an even bigger mess,
I mean,
if I'm honest.
the thing is, people still love it, and people are going to love
Yeah,
it because people who love bad Broadway and people who love musicals, even though I'm a theater person, despite my attestations otherwise, apparently, I don't love musicals. I like some musicals, and I'm a big jerk about a lot of them.
well, I know that musicals work really well for teenagers, and I respect that about them, and that it's a lot of the time it's not for me. Um, I still like a lot of older musicals, but I just don't really bother watching newer ones because I just don't assume I'm not going to enjoy them because they're
There
just not
are
for me.
I very much enjoy Hadestown. It's probably because I'm a hipster. Um, but also it's good. 6 is quite good, but it's also about, Henry the
Yeah.
Ace Wives, and again, it's hip and cool and whatever. But like, you look at what's coming up and you see things and whatever. But like, Broadway, people who are fans of Broadway, which is not me, even though I still know plenty of people who are working there, are just vaguely rabid about all of these little shows that didn't quite
Didn't
make
make it.
it,
Yeah.
are disasters, are things like this because they're ephemeral, they didn't last very long, and they were just trash fires.
And
And
I mean, this podcast is ultimately, for the most part, about cult ephemera.
yeah,
So I definitely get it. Even when I don't like something, I get it.
yeah.
Um,
And
and
you know what? More power to them.
yeah,
I'm not gonna yuck their yum just
yeah, yeah,
because it's not my jam.
yeah,
I will not watch it though. So
yeah,
even though I have called it trash and terrible and will in fact tell them everything that's wrong with it from a technical and moral level.
yeah.
Maybe
Unfortunately,
that sounds
the
like
technical
sucking it.
the problem with this is that it wasn't. We weren't watching a movie version of it, so the technical stuff we just have to basically uh, infer a lot. Is
Yeah. And if I
y-
was watching it live, I would also just sit in a chair and keep my mouth shut.
yeah. Well, and I mean, if you were reviewing it based on the live version you had seen, and we're not really doing that. We're
No.
trying to base it on a ultimate cut of sorts that doesn't
Mhm.
exist. That we're just
Exactly.
sort of imagining. But yeah, so but we should move on because
We should, because we have two more to go.
yeah, and so the next one was the one you suggested that I first thought was one of the Dollar Babies, but was actually even more bizarre than that, called N period.
N.
Stephen King's N period. 2008. So the backstory on this one is N is a novella written by King that appears in the collection Just After Sunset, which I've never read any of. Just After Sunset, I just read this story so I could get an idea for it. Um, in interviews about the book itself, he said it was inspired by Arthur Machen's The Good God Pan, which I've never read, but I don't know if you've read that. Before
I have
publication,
not, I don't think.
okay,
But maybe I did. I don't remember. I've read a lot of things.
yeah, you're a big reader. I'm functionally illiterate, but that's why you're here. But um, so this one before publication, it was adapted into this thing that was a multi-part graphic video series that was really a marketing campaign. This is essentially we're talking about a commercial here, and it was made up of 25 1.5 minute episodes and runs about 30 minutes, a little bit under 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's essentially motion comic. It's not really animated. It's
Yeah.
like a motion comic or a motion storyboard. And but it has CBS or whatever, I can't remember the publication studio, money behind it. It was drawn by Alex Maleev, who had done stuff for Heroes at the time, the NBC show that was burned out really fast. Um, he was at the time known for his work on Daredevil, and it was funny that I didn't know this. I had just reread all the Daredevil he did, and I was looking him up because he has a style that looks almost like he takes traces photographs and then puts stuff onto them. It's a very
Yeah.
Xeroxy style, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. He's not working from like I'm thinking he has a photograph source that he works from, so it's not really animated as much as certain things move and the camera pans, and so there'd be layers. um
Yeah. I mean, it's very distinct. And
right, and
especially at the time.
yes, and so and at the time we had motion comics had a very brief moment there for some reason. It was a sort of um DVD motion comics was like a short-lived thing where you could buy them at Target, or Walmart or whatever. There was the big one was the Watchmen, which was a little more animated than some of the other ones, but released again as sort of an ad for the movie that was coming out. But people ended up really liking it. And then there was one in 2010 that was a Black Panther series that was then aired on BET. And there's a 2009 one based on a Joss Whedon X-Men run, Astonishing X-Men, I think. Most of these don't look very good, I don't think, because
No.
they weren't planned to be in motion. So the thing that makes N work better is that it was designed to have them moving a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's built into the composition. The closest I can think of something I thought really worked well was the MTV series in the 90s for the Max, which
Yeah.
really, I
does.
think, thought better about what to do with the motion.
Yeah. Yeah. It does really remind me of the Max, actually.
And I guess a more recent one was on Shudder did a Creep Show special in 2020 or 21 that was very similar, kind of mostly motionless panning shot type stuff. And so this was released in these little parts and you could watch it on your phone. And I was like, that sounds stupid. It was 2008. Well, I looked into it in 2008. YouTube wasn't nearly as popular as it is now. I didn't realize that. It just feels like...
Yeah, no, this was real early.
So you originally could watch each minute and a half long episode on your phone as it came out. And if you paid some like extra thing, you could get them early. And then they
Yeah,
also put out
absolutely not.
the comic
Sorry.
itself. Yeah. And it was adapted by Mark Guggenheim, who co-created the ABC TV series Eli Stone. Never saw it. Don't know anything about it.
Yeah,
But
no.
that's his other thing. So it was basically a joint partnership of Simon and Schuster, Marvel Entertainment, and CBS Mobile, and really hyped up as a new concept. Ultimately was a commercial for a book that was coming out. So it has a lot of, unlike Carrie, which has the Harry the Musical, which has a lot of built-in things that should make it good. This has a lot of built-in things that should make it terrible.
Yeah.
And I would say that if this would have just been a 30-minute short movie, I think it would have worked a little bit better because you can hear the voice actors really rushing through their lines sometimes.
Yeah.
And if you watch it on YouTube, they haven't edited out the episode number counts, so that takes out like a solid 3 seconds of each, or 2 seconds of each episode is an episode number and title.
Yeah. And okay, so I remember watching this as it came out. And so when it first came out, you could watch all of them at once, but it strung the episodes together and you had to watch like the intro and outro too. And it was interminable. But the story was very good. So it was like Stephen King's N, episode 1. And then you watch the thing, and then it would be like some outro, and then Stephen King's N, episode 2. And like, so there was like even more chunk in the middle.
It really breaks it up. But conceptually, it's a great story, and it's exactly what someone like me who is doubtful of Stephen King, especially in novel form, this is exactly what he's good at, which is ultimately aping and modernizing H.P. Lovecraft, I think.
Yeah, really. Which is, so like, this story is basically a guy goes to his psychiatrist for a problem and is actually holding back the madness of the world with his mind.
Right, and so
messes up.
He has severe obsessive compulsive disorder.
Yeah.
And I don't know, again, I don't know if Stephen King does have any sort of, I mean, he's a writer. He probably writes it sort of somewhat compulsively. So maybe he has a form of it. But I actually do have OCD. It's been medicated since I was a teenager. So I have like, I would never was as bad as this guy, but I have like a little window into the idea that you have this worry in your head. If I don't do some specific thing, bad things are going to happen. In my case, it was very specific. If I don't do this specific thing, I'm going to get sick. If I don't do this specific thing, someone's going to break into my house and kill my family. But some people have, if I don't do this specific thing, I don't know what will happen, but it will be very bad. And that's a very scary idea. And the concept that that person, because you always tell yourself, even when you're in the throes of OCD, you there's part of, at least for me, in the back of my brain saying, this won't really happen, right? Like, this is just your brain telling you this. But how scary it would be that, oh no, I didn't do it, and it turned out I was holding back the end of the world with my weird OCD stuff. That's really scary. And it's also scary from the point of view of someone who doesn't have OCD. What if the person who's the paranoid person is a very common thing in horror stories, and H.P.
Yeah.
Lovecraft in particular. Like, oh, that's a crazy story, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about, but oh my god, not only did he know what he was talking about, but now that we haven't trusted him, we've helped usher in the end of times.
Yeah. And also there was this concept of like, could it be contagious?
Yes, and that's another really cool thing about psychiatric horror is
Yeah.
idea. I just watched a movie called The Relic, which had come out in 2020. I've been told I needed to see it forever. And the idea in that movie is sort of
By
that,
me.
huh?
By me.
Yeah.
I told you needed to watch it.
You were one of many people. Yes, and it was great. But the idea there is not entirely, but sort of being haunted by someone else's dementia or Alzheimer's, as if not just that you catch their dementia, but that the things that make their dementia frightening affect you.
Yeah.
And so I suppose there's a really thin line in both those cases. As someone with OCD, I'm allowed to say this was fine. This is not insulting to people with OCD. But if it was some other mental illness, I would be a little more cautious. Like if it was a schizophrenic character, I would want to be cautious and not want to say, oh yeah, Stephen King knows all about schizophrenics, and because maybe he doesn't.
Admittedly, when I was like, hey, after I watched it, I had forgotten, because it had been years since I had watched it. I had sent it to Gabe, and I was like, hey, so I forgot something about this.
Yeah.
This might not be as good as I thought it was. I'm sorry.
No, but I think that there is, as someone who watches horror and understands subversive and stuff, there's always that line between what's offensive and what isn't, and that line is different for everybody. And so when you deal with mental illness in horror, there's certain people that you're always going to cross the line. And like, so some people will never want to watch Relic because they have a relative with dementia or Alzheimer's and they feel like it's being made fun of. But then other people will watch it and will feel like the movie understands what they're going through. Because it's really about caretakers and not the person who has it. It's really about how caretakers deal with it. Whereas this is both. This is about how you deal with mental illness and how other people deal with mental illness.
Yeah. There have definitely been movies that both Gabe and I have watched about various kinds of mental illness where both of us have had differing opinions on how they've treated it. And that is both of our rights as people who have dealt with it. So
yeah, as long as it's not dangerous, a dangerous reading of it, I think that everybody has it in them, and it should be respected on how much it bothers them. So so like no trigger warning on this particular movie, I don't think, unless you have really bad OCD and it's going to trigger that out of you by having something that it treats the idea that your compulsions are real. But otherwise, I don't think that it's an offensively done thing. And again, I think that King must have an understanding of what it's like.
It's definitely one where I was like, oh yeah, ooh.
Well, what's interesting is that, and in fact, the last one we're going to talk about here, it goes into this a bit, but King is really untrusting of psychiatric authority to a degree that it's almost dangerous in some cases. Apparently, he had some sort of awful childhood experience with a psychiatrist or analyst or something, and he never got over it.
I do wonder if, well, again, I haven't looked into this. I do wonder, given how many bad doctors he has, in his work, um, how much medical trauma he has in his life. So,
Yeah. And
uh, especially with like mental health, and especially you get like before the 2000s, there's just a lot worse mental health
yeah.
care in general.
And
So
and so what makes this story unique among other Stephen King stories I've read or seen movies based on is the psychiatrist really does have the guy's best interests at heart and is trying really hard to understand him and work with him. He's not being judgmental or dismissive.
he's a really good
Yeah,
psychologist.
he's trying. He's trying so hard.
Psychiatrist even. Yeah.
And
Like
then even he realizes, oh crap, it's contagious and I got it now. The
mhm.
Lovecraft part really comes out of the fact that everybody's been writing down their experience, and that's so it's a third party reading the psychiatrist's
It is
notes.
such an epistolary story.
Yeah.
Like all of it's coming from letters and like recordings, and it's I I just really like this story partially because it is told in a different medium than most.
Hmm.
It when I first experienced it, it was right after college. And it was on the internet in this weird short story format that was coming out every so often. It was slightly after um like the Green Mile was being like released
Hmm.
in the short story like books.
Yeah, yeah, those weird
Um
little yeah,
yeah, which was dumb and terrible.
yeah. It was an
Um
experiment that did not work.
yeah. But through Simon and Schuster, and so they were also trying this. Um
They saw the writing on the wall for published books. They knew they had to do something.
yeah, well, okay. They were shooting themselves in the own foot with publishing, and so they were trying to make money different ways.
Yeah.
Anyway, publishing industry has done a lot of things to themselves.
Well, I mean, there's this is totally off subject, but at this around this time, you had Walden Media trying desperately to become a real media company, a movie media company, and
Yeah.
just not getting it to work out for them. Like they really thought after Harry Potter was a hit that they were just gonna take the world on, and it just never really worked out for them. So yeah, this was
Yeah.
a time when book publishing houses really thought they were going to become movie. And again, it's just Harry Potter, I guess. Now that I think about it, goes back to fucking Harry Potter. Harry Potter
Yeah.
became a hit, and every movie studio is like shit, and every book studio is like shit. They all tried to make the
Yeah.
next Harry Potter to mostly disastrous effect.
Yeah. Well, and so this came out and I was like, this is just the weirdest thing.
Hmm.
Um and I remember like the Hellboy motion comics,
Oh
I think
yeah,
were the
those were
first.
good. Those were good.
Yeah. I think that was the first motion
Screwhead
comic.
was a
Um
Michael Mignola's Screwhead was another one he did. His
yeah.
work really um, lends itself to the motion comic though so well.
Cuz he has like those real thick lines.
Yep, yep. And then you take something like the I guess it worked okay for Watchmen, but the Marvel ones in particular, because they were just too much cross hatching and shit going on. It just doesn't
Yeah.
look good.
You need to have like a real heavy base for the like chunky animation style to work.
And it's sort
Um
of a flat. If it works really well, it's sort of a flat 3D idea, like a what do you call it? A diorama. It's sort of like
yeah.
a video diorama is the way to think about it when it works well. And when they try to make things move like limbs on people, that's when it starts to look weird. I feel like
Yeah.
I feel like people are fine watching mostly. I mean, documentaries. What's his name? Ken Burns, sort of made slowly panning shots of photographs into a cinematic language over the years. I think people are perfectly comfortable with watching that.
Yeah. I mean, you have to think of them kind of like paper dolls.
Yeah.
And um but people want to have a shortcut to animation that you have to really like figure out the language on its own.
Yeah. I mean,
Um
I can understand people not wanting to spend theater money to see a motion comic, but like, especially in the streaming era.
Yeah.
It's a little weird even
Yeah.
to spend DVD money on it, to tell you the truth. Now that I think about it, it's a little strange to buy 30 minutes. I guess it came free with the book. If you bought the book, the complete thing was on DVD, and that's the version that's up on YouTube now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And like when it was online, like it was free and that was
yeah,
fine. And it was coming out like once a week.
yeah. And again, I mean, it's
Uh
because it was an ad, and it's so it had a lot of leeway to just sometimes advertising is, again, this is a situation that's kind of the opposite of Carrie the musical, where this shouldn't have worked and it should have all these limitations, but it didn't. And
yeah.
it's like the opposite, where they made the limitations work for themselves pretty well.
Yeah.
It's
And
not a lost classic.
but
There's
it'll always remind me just a little bit of like both the story itself is limited. It is a story that you kind of feel, you feel the confines of the story. It's time limited. It is being told from the present to the past. It's a girl telling the story about her brother, telling the story about his patient,
Mhm,
about his experience. So you know all the people, all like the men in the first part of the story are dead
mhm.
because that's what happened in the first like sentence of the story. So all of those limits are in place. And so you're like, okay, how did all these people die? Um, but then you find the more limits as you come in and exactly how screwed everything is.
Yeah.
Though
Another thing
those
it
Mhm.
reminded me of is the sort of post millennial J horror movies have a certain way where uh, ring to a certain degree, where it's like a contagious curse. But
Yeah.
also the movie Pulse or Cairo,
Yeah.
where it's really, that movie. I've talked about this with Jim on a previous podcast. That movie is really sort of about contagious depression and how it affects people. So it made me think of that. It says here that there's going to be a TV series based on it called Eight, which is a reference to some the you see eight. Um,
Yeah, there are 7 stones, but there are 8 stones.
yeah, so when you look through a camera lens, you see eight stones. It's like a sort of Stonehenge type thing. Um, so I can see
Interesting.
this actually working. It works nicely as a 30-minute short, but it's one that I can see being expanded in a really good way. I don't know if I want to go total TV series. That seems like a lot, but man, it could make a really good movie.
I could see like a mini series. I was really impressed with the recent Stephen King universe television series.
I only watched the first season of that.
I
Castle
liked
Rock.
the second season
Yeah, I
too.
didn't watch the second
Um,
one. That was
but
something that dealt with Alzheimer's in a really interesting way too.
yeah,
Yeah.
I really liked the first season, and then the second season went to a different timeline,
Hmm.
and I still really liked it. I was very impressed.
Well, okay, so we'll move on to the last one. So the last one was the whole idea I had in the first place. Is I was convinced there was like dozens of Malaysian and Indian ripoffs of Stephen King stories because they're so popular, and I ended up only finding two. And this is one. It's No Smoking, directed
Which,
by
yeah,
Anurag Kashyap. And it's based on Quitters Inc., which was another night shift short, and which
which
was
is a
adapt.
weird story.
Yeah, it's very well. Okay, it was adapted for the Louis Teague movie Cat's Eye, and most people remember Cat's Eye, the episode of that, the general about the cat that guards the little girl against the gremlin that lives in the wall. But Quitters Inc. is the best one. It's the one with James Woods, and it's a person goes to a company that will help him quit smoking, and they go to weird extremes to make them stop smoking. Um, and it's very Stephen King from the standpoint that he doesn't trust psychoanalysts, and uh, he had dealt with alcohol addiction. I don't know if he had a smoking issue, but he had dealt with alcohol addiction. So it had some very personal elements to it, but it's not really, one, it's not really a horror story traditionally, and two, the thing that works about it is that it's Kafka. It's all about the horrors of extreme, uh like conspiracy of bureaucracy, I should say. That's what I'm thinking of. The idea of
Okay,
this
yeah.
sort of unstoppable bureaucracy that all that just is so insane, but it's really only insane to you. um I think like Brazil is a version of the Terry Gilliam movie Brazil, where there's
Yeah.
just the way
Yeah.
that the world functions around this poor man. So the idea that you go to a place to kind of quit smoking, and it's just your entire life ends up revolving around it. And then it's also like there's the David Fincher movie The Game,
Yes.
where a sort
Yeah.
of rich bored guy is put into this ridiculous
LARP.
um, LARP. Yeah, it's basically a LARP. It's a LARP that he can't tell if it's real or not. And he's like thinks he's actually in danger. He's not sure if it's part of the game or if he's actually in danger. It's sort of a mix of those two things. There's a lot on IMDb about this movie. I assume because it was a minor hit in Bollywood hit. And the problem is most of the stuff is someone has copy pasted entire interviews without formatting them. So it's
Oh,
just
cool.
words. So I went through the words. And so some of the stuff I got out of it is the director thought of it as Kafka, but he was trying to make Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which
Okay.
this has some of those sort of surreal, trapped in your own memories kind of things that happen in that, which is to me not traditional horror, but a very scary thing. Uh, the idea
I
that you
can
don't,
see that, I guess.
yeah, like I think Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a kind of scary movie, just from the standpoint that uh, your part of you is dying basically by erasing memories. You're killing part of yourself. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it's just because I watch so many horror movies that I find esoteric ideas scarier than zombies and mad killers. I don't know.
I guess I find it more of a tr- it's more of a tragedy.
Yeah,
Like it's a sad movie.
yeah, but I do think it's less of a black comedy than the James Woods version. But I still think it's a black comedy because the thing it changes is instead of a corporation, it's a guru, and he's
Yeah.
basically created a cult that's a marketing scheme. Uh, so it's a really clever adaptation from that point. Even though a lot of the movie is super surrealistic and like mix and match, like there's a flashback that's set up like an old sitcom, and it is technically a musical, not in this from the standpoint that most you would think of a Bollywood musical. A lot of the musical elements are uh, just sort of interstitial scenes with music playing in the background that's sort of describing the plot. There's only one scene where characters actually stop to sing, and it's in a club where there's people singing. So at no
Yeah.
point do the main characters stop and sing.
Well, there's also like singing over the end
Yeah,
describing what's happening.
yeah.
Like
It's
certain
more like a
cues.
Greek chorus,
Yeah.
a poppy Greek chorus. Apparently, another thing I gleaned from the walls of text was that both the star and director were sort of forced to add all the music to make it more commercial, because I guess they still have to sell albums and stuff, and they
Wild.
were kind of uncomfortable with it but I still think it's kind of nice. It's decent.
Yeah,
It's pretty good music. It's eclectic music. They
it
don't
is.
stick
It
with one
is.
style. There's a yeah, like the musical number is a Bob Fosse number. It's supposed to be cabaret basically. It's even the club they're in is called Dead Fosse or something like that.
Yeah, it is. It's wild.
So there's a lot of that stuff going on, but at its heart it's yeah, you're right, it's a tragedy. It's a story about an unlikable guy who kind of gets comeuppance for being unlikable and doesn't really have the chance to change. When he finally changes himself, it's already too late.
I will admit, I thought you were talking about uh, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless
Oh,
Mind.
no, sorry, I moved
That is
on
a
from that.
tragedy. This is definitely
that
more of a
one's
black
that
comedy.
one's a tragedy with a sort of scary idea. This one is a black comedy.
Black comedy with some tragic elements.
Yeah.
Um, though, yeah, they try to set it up as more of a horror just by having him be so goddamn unlikable.
Yeah. And,
Um,
and the original short, which is a very short story, I think it's 15 pages.
yeah, it's
And it's
very
mostly
short.
dialogue. So there's
Uh-huh.
not a lot there. It's easy to adapt because there's very little going on.
Yeah. But yeah, it is a story that like it is, in my opinion, one of Stephen King's scariest stories, partially because, at least when I read it when I was very young,
Mhm,
because of like how much they were able to like completely take over his life
mhm.
so quickly, and like immediately be able to just control every part of it. Like that terrified me.
Yeah, and it's sort of like playing on the fact that you might not have any control over anything, and that's why it lends itself. The James Woods version sort of makes it into a corporate America type thing, and this one, like I said, it makes it into a sort of cult, which I thought was really clever way of doing it. Um, in this version, so like you have punishments for if you smoke a cigarette, and they're always watching you. First cigarette, you I can't remember exactly how the rules go in this movie version. First cigarette, they kidnap a loved one and put them in a smoke chamber and make their lives miserable, but don't kill them. And then the second one, you lose a finger, and then you lose another finger, and then they will kill a loved one.
Yeah.
And this version changes it in that you can either um, re-enter someone into it. So, like a multi-level marketing scheme, if you get a friend involved and paid in, because you have to pay in so much money. If you get a friend involved, then you can. So he convinces his friend to join this anti-smoking, this non-smoking thing, and then he gets a finger back. And they have this like device that lets you get your finger back. Um, or another guy gets mad because he wanted to be the one who was credited with getting his friend involved, because then he would get his wife back because they've kidnapped his wife. Half the documentaries on streaming media are about either a cult or a multi-level marketing scheme or both. So it really feels, even though this was made more than 10 years ago, this feels pretty you know
Yeah.
modern. It's just current,
And
which
it's wild like how, okay, so it was made 10 years ago and it's about stopping smoking and like how devastatingly hard it is to
mhm,
stop smoking. Um and it's wild in like the US society where basically it's like, oh yeah, no, everybody should stop smoking, but like we all kind of know that
mhm.
it's bad for you, whatever. But like we don't have a huge if you make me stop smoking, I'm less of a man thing.
Right. We used to.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
there's a couple scenes of people complaining about how you're not allowed to smoke in public anymore in this movie. But this, if this was been remade in America, there would have been like 30 minutes of that, of just older smokers complaining about the fact that they
yeah,
can't smoke in public anymore, which would feel kind of old already. I don't feel like people really complain about that as much anymore. I think they sort of take it for granted. But anyway,
yeah, it's interesting. Like there's that. The whole buying in and buying out and the like weird mystical part of it that like you can get your finger back or your relative back.
hmm
Um but
and
the main guy is just so damn unlikable.
yeah, and it is a problem for the movie
Like
that
you do not.
you're more worried about what his actions are going to do to other people, which
Yeah.
is a way of telling a story.
Yeah.
Um,
However, though, like there is a point in the movie that he no longer is doing anything and everything is happening to him and it's
mhm.
still punishing him.
That was
Like,
for sure. Like, it's too long. I mean, you just
yeah.
assume that Bollywood movies are long because of the musical parts. This is too long even without the musical parts, and it actually creates. There's a whole subplot about as a friend come back from Cuba, wants to start a cigar company, and forces a cigar into his mouth, and that becomes a scene where then they kidnap his and kill his wife, and
Yeah.
and it makes for this really weird thing that one doesn't work for the plot because it's really heavily implied that the guru is just Satan and that
Yeah.
he's working out of hell, because there's like a really fun scene where the guy's trying to go to the damn thing, he's calling it the lab, and he just keeps going downstairs and like, where's the lab? Is it this way? And someone will say down there, and they'll just keep pointing down, and it's that part's all really cool. But the so what that scene does is, one, it makes it so the devil makes a mistake and admits to making a mistake, but also doesn't rectify it, which just feels out of character for that villain. He feels like he's really in control of everything otherwise, and then also creates this really bad secondary subplot where he's being blamed for the death of his wife, or the disappearance of his wife, and he's really not upset about it. He's
Yeah.
more upset about being blamed for something he didn't do and going to prison. And there's not really a learning. It's not really a learning experience. Like by the very end of the movie, it sort of is, and there's a weird
But
thing
also,
where
like, that is the point where you no longer care about anything that happens in the movie.
it
And
becomes a
he no
David
longer
Lynch movie.
cares.
Basically, it becomes a David
Yeah.
Lynch movie,
Yeah.
where everything is so surreal that, so like, for instance, the actress who plays his wife then starts to play his secretary, and then his memories are confused where he can't remember if that was his secretary or his wife, and she has a moment where she says, I'm your secretary who you did marry," and so he doesn't know what time period he's even in, which is very Twin Peaks. And
It's
he's sort
yeah.
of trapped in a purgatory, which reminded me of Twin Peaks. And
And then he has this recurring dream, and but that also takes him to
like
a
that might actually be
purgatory.
happening too, like
Yeah, but then he goes to a gas chamber.
and that was something. So very early in the movie, the wife is watching Schindler's List, and
Yeah.
specifically the maybe most intense scene in the whole movie, which is when a bunch of women are put into a shower, and they know that some of these showers are actually gas chambers, so they're convinced they're going to be gassed, and then they aren't, which is really insensitive of them. But different cultures, different, but it keeps going. And so maybe the fact that they maintained that metaphor made it less insensitive. But it does end with him going to a gas chamber and being melted down, and they bring up that the guru, part of him being actual Satan, was he was friends with Hitler and stuff like that.
Yep.
But the funny thing is they have a better visual allegory in that how polluted, I think it's, I don't know what city it's taking place in, but the skyline is so polluted you can barely see it, and they are not special effecting it up. It's that polluted there. That's a much better allegory for smoke, cigarette smoke,
Yeah.
secondhand smoke. It's so, but then part of me wondered if the guy had read multiple Stephen King short stories and had apt pupil in mind, and that's why he went with gas chamber stuff.
Maybe, but still.
But still, that was something in the back of my head, remembering gas chamber, and the apt pupil short story is really graphic about gas chamber stuff.
Yeah, still. It hated it.
Yeah, not a
Hated
big
it.
fan of that choice.
Hated it was bad. Hated it and it was bad.
So there are some bad things and some good things. I don't know a lot about the director, but apparently he does tend to make sort of surrealistic and absurdist movies.
There was also like the point in the middle where like he and his best friend were first learning how to smoke, and
Yeah,
it was him and his dad, like his best friend's dad found him in the bathroom, and his dad was like, you guys shouldn't be messing around here because being gay is bad. No, we're just learning how to smoke. And like I know that's a cultural thing,
yeah, that was
but
the moment that
also
felt like a weird sitcom thing, and I was
yeah.
okay with them. I mean, not conceptually, but the idea that they would just have all these little inserts, and the fact that his recurring dream about being in Russia doesn't really make any sense. That kind of stuff I was willing to go with. It was when the plot itself really changed that I didn't think it worked out for them.
Yeah, it was just weird, and uh, uh, again, like the weird sitcominess. is the weird sitcom-y toneness is fine.
Hmm.
The weird, like, I thought you were gay part
Oh yeah, yeah. No, that was no good.
was shitty and bad.
Yeah, it definitely
Um,
would have been culturally appropriate when that actor was a kid. But yeah,
yeah, yeah.
there I should say there's one really well done joke, absurdist joke, where to test the system, because he has so much money, he creates this. It's not even a long scene, it's just a series of events where he puts himself literally in the middle of nowhere, much the middle of nowhere as he can possibly find. He doesn't even know where he's going. He has other people arrange his flights, and he ends up in I think he's like supposed to be in the middle of the savannah, and he looks around and no one's around, and he takes that cigarette, and as soon as he lights it, a guy comes out from under the earth, who's clearly of the African branch of this anti-smoking thing, uh, because he is actually an African guy. He's not like an Indian guy, and he hands him a phone that says, "Well, you broke your promise. We're going to take your brother." Uh, that was a good joke, I thought. When from that point of view, that kind of absurdist comedy, I liked that stuff a
Yeah,
lot.
that was good. Like, that was, I was still bought into the movie at that point.
Yeah,
Like, but I also knew what was going to happen
yeah,
because, again, bought into the movie still.
yeah.
Uh, it just, again, I agree with your criticism that it was way too long. At least a half hour, maybe 45 minutes.
Hmm.
It needed to be, and potentially like the 2 hour runtime is a Bollywood thing.
Oh yeah, I
Uh,
mean most Bollywood movies are like 3 hours long because they have to have big breaks for musical numbers, but this one doesn't really even have that. It just was overlong.
it was too long. It didn't have enough anything for its runtime, and
It looked really nice, very
it was
nice.
very pretty. It just, and I did like the weird uh speech bubbles, thought
Yeah,
bubbles.
little
That
comic book.
was, yeah, that was a good visual, like, but man,
It's a lot. It's a lot, and it feels like something that would come out in 2007 from its degree of a lotness.
yeah, yeah.
I should say the other Bollywood movie was a 2003 version of Misery,
Oh
um,
man.
which is available on YouTube right now, called Julie Ganapathy or Ganapathy. Really bad with I can usually read Indian words, but I can never pronounce them correctly. But that sounds like a good idea too. And I don't know if that one's a musical, but I kind of hope it is because I love musical breaks in a Misery, uncredited Misery adaptation.
That'd be jamming.
Yeah. So a mixed bag overall, but
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that,
but
definitely.
definitely a weird Stephen King adaptation. So
Absolutely.
fits with what we were doing here.
Exactly.
Do you have anything else to say about this one, or?
No, I think I've had enough opinions on it.
I mean, I can't really think of any other Stephen King things I've watched that I would definitely need to. Like I said, there's just been a resurgence. So there's been some good stuff, and Mike Flanagan, like I said, Midnight Mass was a very good Stephen King esque thing. Um,
Yeah, I know that I was trying to get you to watch the bad mid 2000s television anthology. Um
oh, but not Bag of Bones.
no.
Oh,
Five Minutes to Midnight?
Nightmares and Dreamscapes.
Nightmares and Dreamscapes. Yeah, that
Yeah,
was it.
yeah.
But I watched a couple of episodes and oh man, they chewed the scenery so hard on those. Woof.
Yeah.
Woof. Like their teeth were breaking. And as much as these are weird adaptations, those are, I watched one specific one that was the one that I always remember when I'm thinking about it. That was
Hmm.
their hardest Lovecraft adaptation.
Hmm.
And oh man, that scenery just broke. Just broke. It got chewed so hard.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Stephen King TV adaptations are almost their own genre. At least when you go back far enough to when there would be miniseries events for all of them. That was a
I
weird
mean,
thing.
the
Like, I dare
miniseries-
someone today to watch The Langoliers and make sense of what went into making the like what choices were made.
somebody wanted to see flying spaghetti balls.
Yeah.
And that was it. I mean, I have a deep love of Salem's Lot, the miniseries, but that's just because I grew up in small town America, and
Are you
enjoy pain.
Are you talking about the original one? Or
Oh no, absolutely not. I'm
Okay.
talking about the terrible one.
The one with
No,
no. Okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I like the original one, but that was really a miniseries too. That was like the first Stephen King miniseries.
Yeah, the second one has a very particular way of showing small town gossip
Mhm.
that I don't think has shown up in many shows, and it's not good.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
I would imagine it's not.
but like, it's unique, and its uniqueness is what gives me strength as a terrible chaos goblin.
Mhm.
So I'll take it. Anyway, but we aren't talking about television series. We're talking about weird movies, and that's it.
Yeah.
And one weird web series.
Remind the people where they can find you, Betsy.
Well, you can find me at yourfavoritemonsters.com, where my Twitter stuff is linked, which is Your Favorite Monsters on Twitter. But my personal Twitter is Avatar of Chaos. And other than that, I guess looking at me for Under the Moon, Somewhere in the Night, maybe under your bed.
Oh, yeah, good point. I can be reached as usual on Genre Grinder at Twitter, Genre Grinder Facebook page, at Gabe M Powers on Twitter, and you can also just go to the Genre Grinder website, where I still have quite a few reviews I have to finish writing, Blu-ray releases. So look forward to that. Until next time. Oh yeah. Until next time. If you live in Texas, know a trans person. Don't be a fucking snitch.
Snitches get stitches.
Snitches get stitches. Goodbye, everyone. You have to say goodbye. They think you died.
Goodbye.
There you go.
That's not my name. Doesn't anybody ever get it right? Carrie. Why don't they remember I'm Carrie White? Carrie. Is it any harder to see than goddamn total spastic and weirdo and dumb bitch? Doesn't anybody think that I can hear? I hear. Especially when I've got him screaming in my ear. I hear. Every day they mock me and push me.